Okay, number four, I'm not afraid of fat, even butter or lard. In fact, animal fats are a staple in my diet, sourced from healthy animals, according to fun fact number two. I don't trim the fat off meat, skim my bone broth, throw out the yolks, or toss delicious crispy chicken skin. Excuse me. This not only keeps my food delicious, but ensures I'm eating and absorbing essential nutrients. Is that still something you believe in, including lots of fat in your diet that's coming from good whole animal sources?
Yep, that has not changed. I guess the one caveat is sometimes if I make bone broth and it's like ridiculously fatty, or if it's like, I don't know, I don't always save the fat. If it's like a chicken broth, they're kind of like pretty high omega-6. I might toss that, but I usually do save the tallow that comes to the top of like a beef bone broth or something, and we'll use that in cooking in other ways. I still to this day never buy fat-free dairy products. It's always full fat. Never throw out the yolks. I still shudder when I see people making their, egg white omelets because they just want to up the protein for as few calories as possible. Yeah, fat is still, a large portion of the diet. And I think people get a bit confused about this. And this comes down to one of those places where sometimes tracking is useful. And part of why the practitioners I train, I do have them do a nutrient analysis because people have these ideas of what their macro breakdown is. But if you actually start to if you actually write down what you eat and run it through a nutrient analysis, it's really hard to comply with like a less than 30% fat, you know, diet. That's like miserable, tasteless. You're taking the fat out of everything. Everything is low fat. You're using minimal amounts of fat for your cooking or whatever. So I don't, mainline sticks of butter or anything. I don't have a personal medical need to be on a fully ketogenic diet, but I'm definitely not taking the fat out of anything. The fat that's there is consumed, and I do cook with fat enough to, have things not stick to the pan and make things taste good. But I'm also not drowning things in like a ridiculous quantity of butter either. It's like enough to taste good from a culinary perspective.
I think that's probably the best way to approach it. We talked about tracking and macros and that kind of thing earlier, and I've always had the hardest time giving kind of general recommendations around fat. If somebody was looking for a number to be able to hit, obviously we can titrate up or down based on what somebody's goals are. But it is very difficult. When I can look at carbohydrates and say, okay, keep these like reasonably low as you can tolerate depending on your goals. Protein, obviously, we both agree we want the protein to be very high. Within that, there is kind of some movement as far as fat goes and whether people are adding a lot more fat to their diet or not. It can get a little bit tricky. So I do like the recommendation of just have the whole food the way that it is and the way that it came to you. You don't necessarily need to drown everything in oil or eat that stick of butter. You can add some of that to it if you want, but you don't need to like go out of your way to avoid the fat, and you also don't need to go out of the way to add a whole bunch more fat to the diet usually.
Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the day, even though I don't count calories, I mean, fat is a highly concentrated source of calories and, it's very satiating, which is great. But you can have people adding so much fat. I think some people went a little overboard from the keto era, but like they had the carb creep going on, but also eating tons of fat. And that combination is going to be problematic. Like if you are just way over exceeding your caloric needs, like yeah, you'll gain weight and you'll have some insulin resistance creeping in. So there's some common sense that has to come into play. And again, that's why I'm like, don't take the fat out of all the things, like eat it where it is naturally occurring and cook with a little fat, but you don't have to add a ton. I I think my recommendations maybe have shifted a bit over the years as you kind of hear feedback from people and see how people's eating has shifted. When I was first writing, people were still so fearful of fat, and some of that has faded away. That people got like maybe in some ways overly fearful of carbs, and so sometimes our messaging needs to be adjusted a little bit. But ultimately, that's also kind of the challenge when you're writing to the masses versus working one-on-one with somebody. When you're working one-on-one, you can identify the like little tweaks and areas. When you're writing to the masses, that's where things get tricky. And especially for so many women having restricted fat for their entire lives, we run into issues. But on the flip side, you get people going, full, maybe Weston Price style eating, and they're putting like a, quarter-inch layer of butter on multiple pieces of sourdough bread over the course of a day. And it's like, well, maybe we don't need quite that much,
Common sense, like you said. And speaking of common sense, I hope everybody who's watching or listening would already know the answer to this question. But just to hear it from you, what are the fats that people should avoid?
The ultra processed seed oils, or as we used to call them, vegetable oils. So soy, canola, corn, cottonseed. There's probably more on the list, but generally it's the seed oils I don't recommend you consume like a huge amount of. I am not perfect, so if we go to a restaurant, there's probably seed oils in there, which probably explains why usually my digestion doesn't feel quite as good. I don't feel quite as good when we eat out a lot. But I'm not perfect by any means, but I don't I try to keep them out of the house. Certainly there's no bottles of canola oil in the pantry or anything. And I try to keep the processed foods to a minimum so we're not getting a lot of seed oils. You really want to be focused on, the animal fats are great: butter, ghee, tallow, lard, the coconut oil or even palm oil. I know people get all up in arms about whether it's sustainably sourced or not. That's another topic. Avocado oil sometimes, olive oil. It really, some of these oils are easily adulterated, which is why I kind of like give it with a caveat. But I do use like an olive oil for salads, and occasionally use an avocado oil if I need like a really neutral flavor that doesn't taste like olives in something. So yeah, those are the ones that I generally am eating.
Again, just doing the best you can with what you have, I think is
Yep.
totally fair game. Awesome. Okay, great. Number 5. I've been a guest on over 200 podcasts and radio shows, and you can see which ones on my press page. I'm sure that number is much, much, much higher now. So this is just a quick, fun one, but I just have to ask, besides appearing here at Boundless Body Radio for now the second time, do you have any favorites that really stand out?
Oh, good question. Yeah, so it's well over 200 now, might be over 400. I don't know. I did 90 in 2024 alone, right after Real Food for Fertility came out. So um, we do have some favorites highlighted on the press page. We've highlighted top 30. I guess it's a bit arbitrary because it's hard to like limit it to such a small list, but I really enjoyed my interviews on Max Lugavere's podcast. He's a great interviewer. There have been some really good birth ones that I've been on over the years. Trying to think of the names. They all kind of blur together at this point. I was on Will Cole's podcast this past year, which was good. Um, yeah, go check the top 30. I apologize. I wish my brain was better at remembering them all, but I was like looking back on the press page and I was like, whoa, maybe some of these I maybe shouldn't list anymore. Like Rob Wolf had me on way back when in like 2015. He was super nice to have me on. I talked about gestational diabetes, and that was like one of the top interviews on his Paleo Solutions podcast back in the day. But like that podcast doesn't even exist anymore, right? So it's funny when you start looking like, okay, how much do we link or not link? It starts to get a little bit crazy over time.
Totally. Well, I don't expect you to remember all of those. The birth ones would be interesting because I assume you would be talking to kind of a more like diet naive kind of crowd that are maybe learning about like lower carbohydrate nutrition for pregnancy and gestational diabetes for the first time. Had that been your experience?
It depends. A lot of the birth ones will have me on to talk about gestational diabetes because, depending on how that's managed or what the regulations are in the area that somebody is practicing, uh, it can risk you out of your birth location or birth provider of your choice. So, quite a few midwifery kind of podcasts or doula podcasts will have me on to talk about gestational diabetes for that reason. I can think of one like No Birth Queens was a pretty popular one, but there's been like a whole bunch of midwives and doulas that have had me on. And I would say it kind of ranges like the level of nutrition education that they have. It's certainly a bit of a different crowd than talking to somebody like yourself or somebody in like the metabolic health or low carb keto sphere. Like they might be a bit more naive on the pregnancy specific aspects of things. So yeah, it's always interesting to kind of like the types of questions and the way they're framed will definitely be different based on the background of who the podcaster is.